All right, so today we're going to be talking about reproduction in snails and management of snails. So I'm going to merge these two topics together so that our last class will be the next one. All right, um, reproduction of snails. At the beginning, we said, excuse me, we said snails are hermaphrodites, and an hermaphrodite is an animal or organism that possesses both male and female reproductive organs. So in one snail, you have the penis and you have the vagina, but that one snail cannot fertilize itself. So it requires another snail for fertilization to occur. So two snails have to come and exchange gametes for reproduction to take place. Now, this is done more like trade by barter because you have the penis, I have the penis, and you have the vagina, I have the vagina. So what happens is snail A and snail B will come together. Snail A will insert his penis on the vagina of snail B, and snail B will insert his own penis on the vagina of snail A, and that is how the exchange process takes place. So you can see a picture of it on the screen. So this is how the crossing actually takes place. So once this is done, sperms are deposited on either snails and is being used up for a period of time before they'll come back to mate again. So the snail in itself cannot fertilize itself, but it requires both male organs to be inserted into the female organs of either snails. So that's how the mating process takes place. But you do not have a male snail and you don't have a female snail because snails are hermaphrodites. Now, after eggs have been deposited, after the sperms have been deposited, it will take a few days or weeks before the snails will begin to lay. Now, under the wild condition, when the snails are in the bush or in the forest, remember we had a class where we talked about the production systems. If you've not seen that video, you can subscribe and check out that video, snail production systems. Now, we talked about the breeding, pre-breeding, and post-breeding seasons, where you have the snails breaking out of estivation. Estivation, we say, is the period of dormancy that results in loss of valuable growing time, and it begins from November to March, which is the peak of the dry season here in Nigeria. So the snails will seal up their mouths, estivate, and they break out when the early rains begin to come in March, towards the end of March. So that brings us into the pre-breeding phase. So the snails will break out of estivation and they will begin to take in feed at a slightly high rate because of the starvation period of the estivation, in which they have to survive with the food reserve in their system. Now, after this pre-breeding phase, it runs between March to April, and from April to July, the snails will begin to lay eggs, which is called the breeding phase. So this mating process we talk about takes place within the pre-breeding phase, where the snails will come together and exchange gametes. Now, the breeding phase takes place from April to July, which is when they begin to lay all their eggs in the wild. Now, after that is done, the post-breeding phase begins from July to October, where the snails will cease from laying eggs, but they will begin to consume food at an alarming rate in order to store this food for the estivation period, which is going to commence from November again to March. So this is the cycle in the wild. But under captivity, this cycle is broken because the environment is made is made to suit the habitation of the snails. So all that is required for the snails is provided. Water is readily available all year round. So there is no such period where you have it so dry in the pens that the snails will begin to estivate. No. So as a result of that, we're able to cut out the breeding, pre-breeding and post-breeding phases that occurs in the natural habitat, which is in the forest. But in captivity, under the concrete pen system, intensive system, and the greenhouse system, the semi-intensive system, this cycle is broken. So the snails are allowed to lay all year round. Now, after the laying is done, we excavate the soil to bring out the eggs under the intensive system. Once every week, we excavate the soil in order to bring out the eggs, because the snails incubate the eggs inside the ground or underneath the earth. They open the earth and lay the eggs, cover it, and come out. So once every week, preferably on Saturdays, we take a hoe and till the soil and bring out the eggs. Now, when we bring out the eggs, we take the eggs to an incubator pen where we incubate the eggs. Now, after incubating the eggs, you are expected to wait for a period of 21 days for the eggs to hatch into hatchlings or baby snails or snailets, as some would like to call it. So this process of harvesting the egg is what we call sorting for eggs, and this is done once every week. But while you are feeding the snails, if you spot any egg on the surface of the earth, you must pick those eggs immediately and incubate them immediately. The reason is, if you allow those eggs to remain on the surface of the earth till the day you are expected to sort for all the eggs, those ones on the surface would have gone bad, because once the eggs are exposed to air for a prolonged period, they either crack or turn whitish in color. The ideal color of a snail egg is creamy yellow. Yeah, so once they are exposed to air for a prolonged period, you find out that the eggs will either turn pure white or they crack open. And as a result of that, the eggs will no longer hatch. So once you spot eggs on the surface of your pen, you must pick them immediately and introduce them into the incubator. Now, after incubating them, how do you incubate them? You get the eggs. If the eggs are 100 eggs, you get them, you open the earth. After counting the eggs, you place them on the earth and cover them. You must not place them to the floor of the earth. The incubator pen is the same as the pens where you have your snails. Now, the difference between the incubator pen and the snail pen is the soil in the incubator pen, there is no snail on it. And that soil is a little bit warmer and drier compared to where you have the snails. Now, because you have the snails on some of the pens, you water those pens every day so that the snails can move easily. But where you have the eggs, you don't water it every day. Maybe you just sprinkle little water on it once a week or once in 2 weeks to have sufficient moisture or humidity that is required for hatching. So you don't even need machines to hatch your snail egg. It's just simple earth. Get a good loamy soil and put it in the pen. Then open the pen and introduce the snail eggs inside. Make sure it doesn't get to the floor of the pen. The eggs should be in the middle of the earth. So probably some 2 to 3 inches deep into the earth is perfect. Then the next thing you do is get a piece of paper, write the date you incubated the eggs. Then write the number of the eggs you incubated on that spot. Then also write the expected date of hatching of those eggs, which is 21 days from the day you incubated the eggs. So this is required because in one single pen, you can have 10 to 15 spots where eggs can be incubated. So if you don't indicate the spot where you incubated the eggs, then you might mistakenly open the same spot in trying to incubate new batch of eggs. So the ideal thing to do is after you incubate, you get a piece of paper, write this information I just said, and pin it on top where you incubated the eggs. So when you want to incubate the next week, you would know that there are already eggs there, because with the white piece of paper carrying the information is an indication that eggs have been incubated there. So you pick another spot and incubate, then put the same information on that spot. The next time you pick another spot, so that way you would not accidentally open up eggs that have been incubated in the course of trying to incubate new eggs. So remember the information that must be on the surface of where you incubated the eggs: the date of incubation, the number of eggs incubated, and the expected date of hatching, which is 21 days from the date you incubated the eggs. So that way you would not disturb the eggs until the actual date the eggs are expected to hatch out. But mind you, not all the eggs that were incubated the same day are expected to hatch the same day, because some of the eggs must have been laid earlier, some may have been laid later. Because remember, we are only doing this harvesting of egg once a week, preferably on Saturday. So some eggs must have been laid on Monday, some Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and even that Saturday you are doing the harvesting of the eggs, some might have been laid that Saturday morning. So you do not expect the eggs that were laid Saturday morning or Friday to hatch the same day with the ones laid on Monday. So that is why when you incubate them and write on the paper the expected date of hatching, which is 21 days from that day you incubated them, you will find out that before that 21 days will complete, some eggs have already hatched and have come up the surface of the earth, because immediately they hatch, they find their way to the surface of the earth. So you may be wondering, how come these ones have hatched and it's not 21 days yet? No, it's because they were not laid the same day. So the ones that were laid earlier will hatch first before the ones that were laid later. And that is the same reason why after the first hatching on the 21 day, we have to re-incubate the eggs again. Let's assume 100 eggs were incubated, and at the end of 21 days, 60 of those eggs have hatched into snails. Now what we'll do is we separate the hatchlings, that is the ones that have come out to be snails. We separate them, then the 40 eggs that have not hatched, we re-incubate them again for a further 15 to 20 days. So in between this date of re-incubation and the next 15 to 20 days, you will find out that many of these eggs will be hatching and coming out to the surface on their own. So all you need to do is, when you open the pen, maybe you want to incubate new set of eggs. Now when you open the egg to re-incubate other sets of eggs, you will find out that there are snails on the surface. All you need to do is pick out those snails. Do not open the re-incubated eggs until the due date, either 15 or 20 days from the re-incubated date. So that way you keep picking eggs that have that have hatched, snails that have hatched and have come out. You keep picking them from the pen until the date that is due to open up the re-incubated eggs. Then you open them, you see that majority have hatched and are still under the earth. So you bring out all the eggs that were re-incubated, take the ones that have hatched, then any egg that does not hatch after the extra 15 to 20 days, you discard that egg. It will not hatch again, because the incubation period is a maximum of 35 to 40 days. So once it's 40 days and the eggs do not hatch again, you just discard those eggs. So that is how you carry out the incubation of the eggs. So when you incubate them like that and you get the hatchlings, you transfer the hatchlings into the greenhouse if you have a greenhouse. Now you move them to the greenhouse. We've talked about the greenhouse intensively and the purpose of it. So Of course, if you have not seen that video, please check it out. And for those of you taking out these training classes, you can always go back to those videos to remind yourself. So the hatchlings, you introduce them either to a new pen. If you don't have a greenhouse, you must have extra pens where you have arranged for your hatchlings, your newly hatched snails. So you introduce them to the new pens and feed them just the way you feed the adult snails. But if you have a greenhouse, you move the hatchlings into the greenhouse where they will live like they are in their natural environment, and they will just be feeding and growing. So that is the process for the incubation. You must ensure that after harvesting the eggs, you take them to the pen and incubate them properly. Now, the soil in the incubator will work on that soil because the soil must be loosed and it must retain some level of moisture with good temperature. Now, the reason why we don't allow the eggs to stay in the pens where we have the snails and remain there until they hatch, it's not like they cannot hatch there. They can hatch where the snails are, but the thing is, the hatching percentage will be very low. Why? Because of the continual sprinkling of water on that soil. You figure out that the soil will become too cold for good hatchability. And also, because we keep sprinkling water there, if we don't till the soil will become very compact, and at some point, even if it's a clay, a loamy soil, continual putting of water will turn this soil to a clay soil, and it will become very compact. So even if the snails hatch under the soil, they will find it difficult to burrow up the surface because of the compactability of the soil, and also because of the high level of water inflow in this pen due to the presence of the snails. It will also affect the percentage hatchability of the eggs. So that is why we do the tilling of the soil once every week, not just to pick out the eggs that have been incubated under the earth, but also to keep the soil aerated in good condition week after week for the snails to thrive. Because if the soil becomes too compact that we don't aerate it, the snails themselves will find it very difficult to burrow under the soil to go and lay their eggs. And as a result, most of the eggs will be laid on the surface, which is not good enough. Of course, we've talked about that already. So now the harvested eggs will be incubated. We'll talk to you about the process of incubation, and then they will be hatched out from the incubator pen. So that is the process of the reproduction process of snails. Then when they have been hatched, we have to move them to a different pens. Then we come to management of snails. That is where we'll now talk about stocking density. These are the things you need to understand about snail management. When you stock snails in a very high density, it leads to cannibalism. It leads to high competition for feed. Now, in a single pen measuring 2.5 feet by 5 feet, which is our own standard, we don't need more than 50 snails in that space say a square meter. You don't need more than 40 to 50 snails. If you have 100 breeding snails in a square meter, the population is too high, and as a result, you will have a high rate of mortality because of competition. So the stocking density is very important in any form of livestock production and management you are going into. So it's a key area that needs to be addressed. And also, time of stocking. When do you stock your snails? You can stock your snails at any time of the day, any time of the year. It's okay for you to stock your snails, but it is preferable for you to stock at the onset of the rainy season. The onset of the rainy season. Why? Because naturally the snails lay more eggs in the rainy season, whether they are in captivity or in the wild. It's a natural instinct. They lay more in the rainy season. During the dry season in the wild, we talked about estivation. They would not lay at all, not a single egg. But in captivity, under intensive or semi-intensive care, they will still lay eggs very well, but not as much as it was in the wet season, which is the rainy season. This is why we say it's a natural instinct that comes with the snail. So the best time to stock is the onset of the rains, which is between the months of February, March, April, and so on. The rains have come by April. So those are the best months. But besides that, stocking in December, November, October, it has no adverse impact. You can stock at any time because it is an intensive management system. So the stocking time is anytime you can stock. Now, before you stock your snails, once you acquire the snails, the first thing you do is once the snails are supplied, you pour the snails down. When you pour them on the ground, sometimes when the snails are traveling to your farm, they lay inside the bags or whatever container that is used to convey them. So the first thing you must do is once you receive the snails, open them and pour them on the ground, then spread them. So if there are eggs that have been laid, you will spot the eggs on the floor. Pick out those eggs and incubate them immediately. And after you've done that, you can sprinkle water on the snails on the floor. It's either you sprinkle water on them or get a big bowl and fill it with water, pack the snails in there. After 2 minutes, you begin to stock the snails directly from the water. So this water will keep them fresh. It will energize them because of the stress on transit. So it's either you pour them on the ground and sprinkle water on them. Once you do that, 2-3 minutes, you see the snails become active, they start to move. So it tells you that they are energized, and at that point you can begin to stock them on your farm. Alternatively, you can pour them inside a basin and fill it with water. Give it 2 to 3 minutes. You'll see them struggling to come out of the water, and then they are energized, so you can stock them into your pen. So we talked about stocking density. It is very important for you to understand what that means because it helps you to regulate the number of snails that are required in a particular pen. Then we have different pens. We have the breeding pen, the grower pen, the nursery pen. The nursery pen is where you have the young baby snails. You introduce the baby snails to the nursery pen. If you don't have a greenhouse, so the nursery pen becomes where you introduce those young hatchlings into. They will remain there for at least 2 to 3 months. Then you move them to the grower's pen. They will remain in the grower's pen for another 3 to 4 months. You move them to the breeder's pens. So these pens are the same. There's no difference between the breeders, the nursery, and the grower pen. They are all the same size, the same type of soil, everything management the same. So all we are trying to tell you is when you move snails into the nursery pen, because they are so small at that point, you can have 200 snails in a pen. Now, as they grow, probably 3, 4 to 5 months, as their sizes begin to increase, you reduce the number of the snails. It's not like you have to move the snails to another pen. You reduce the number of the snails to probably 100 because the population density is increasing as the sizes increase. So you break it down, you take out 100 of them to another pen. So this pen becomes a grower's pen automatically because the number has been reduced. Then if they continue to grow to 1 year and you see the sizes are large already, then you reduce it again to 50 snails within that pen. So that pen becomes a breeder pen. Remember that the breeding pens, we have 50 snails per pen. So these categories are based on the number of snails that you have in each of the pens. So that is why we'll categorize it into breeders and breeders, growers, and nursery pen. The only thing, the difference is the number of snails in each of the pens. The nursery pens take in more snails, at least 200 snails. The grower's pen, at least 100 snails. And the breeding pens, at least 50 snails. So those are the number of snails that are occupied in each of these category of pens. Then we'll look at general management practices in a snail farm. There are a lot of things that need to be put in place in a snail farm. Ensure that your snail farm has an overhead shade, the environment is cool, so you don't have issues with excessive sunlight affecting your snails. Then you must ensure that the right type of soil is used, and also dry banana or plantain leaves are placed on the pen to provide additional shade apart from the overhead shade for the snails. Then you must also ensure that your snairy is surrounded with a water trench to prevent or ward off predators and parasites that will come into your snails. Because if the floor is casted, then the sides need to be walled with a water trench so creeping things cannot come in. And also the cover lid of your snail pens should be covered with a plastic net, which is the mosquito net, and also the wire mesh to prevent parasites and predators that fly from on top, and also reptiles that may also want to destroy your snails. So these are some measures that must be taken. Also, you must discourage visitors from coming into your snail farm at will. Any type of farm you have, you must have some form of biosecurity, so you don't allow visitors into the farm just at will. Only those that are working on the farm must go into the farm building. Any other person must stay clear of the farm building. Some persons use fresh poultry droppings as feed for their snails. I don't encourage it. I don't use it, and I don't encourage it because it is not hygienic. Then you also have people who use fertilizers and chemicals. Please do not have any chemical close to your snail pens. It is not ideal for the snail environment. Any form of chemical, whether herbicide or pesticide, is not good for the snails. And always remove leftover feed from the snail pens. Once you give them feed, the next morning ensure that you take out the leftover feed and wash your feeder and drinker so that you don't infest your snails yourself. And always inspect every material that is brought into the snail pen. For instance, the dry plantain leaves, you need to boil hot water and soak them and allow them to cool before you move them into the snail pen, because there are some predators and parasites that come with those dry plantain leaves you put inside the pen. So that is why we boil hot water and soak it inside. You don't need to waste time. Just make sure every part of the dry leaf gets inside, then bring it out back immediately, because what we are targeting is anything insect that is on that dry leaf dies immediately it gets into that boiling hot water. So you bring it out again and just take it to the pens. If you have not stocked the farm already, you can take the hot dry leaves into the pens. But if you have stocked it already, keep the dry leaves in a place that they will get cool. Immediately they get cool off the ground, don't place it on the ground, because once they get cool on the ground, insect can come in again. But keep it off the ground, a table or something, place it on it, then you can now introduce it into the pens. Then the use of poisonous materials for construction. The use of poisonous materials for construction. Please do not use certain chemicals on your snail farm. If you're using wooden pens and you want to treat your woods, make sure you treat the woods at least 1 month before you introduce snails into the pens. Don't treat your woods with chemical today and introduce snails this week or next week. Allow it to stay, the chemical to dry, allow air to blow into that place and take away the harmful effect of that chemical before you introduce your snails on it. And always turn the soil of your snairy in order to keep the soil in good condition. You must turn the soil of the snairy in order to keep the soil in good condition, because if you don't aerate the soil, at some point the soil will become very compact, and that is not also good for snail production. Then young snails must be separated from adult snails. If you have only the concrete pen, ensure that you sort the sizes of the snails to their different categories. Snails practice cannibalism, especially when the stocking density is very high. So when you understand that the snails, the growth difference is high, you have very small ones and very big ones, please remove the smaller ones from the bigger ones so that snails of equal size and age should be kept together. In that way you are able to take care of the issue of cannibalism. And do not overstock your snail pen. Always choose optimum stocking density. All of this information are on the book, so please, when you get the book, try and study it carefully. It will do you a lot of good, coupled with these videos you have. Avoid disturbing the snails on regular basis in the snailry. Do not disturb the snails every day. All you need to do is water the pens, give them food, take out the leftover feed the next morning, close the pens till the hour of feeding. That is the routine management practice in snails. Do not raise the dry leaves on daily basis to check for eggs. Eggs must be harvested once a week. So ensure that the pen is always clean. All you need to do is take out the leftover feed in the morning, close the pen, till in the evening you open the pen, sprinkle water on the surface lightly, then you give them food and close the pen. The next morning you take out the leftover feed, close the pen till evening again. So you are almost doing the same thing every day. What you did yesterday is what you do today. What you do today is what you will do tomorrow. So snail production and management is relatively easy because you are doing a routine job. So it's not a difficult task that is so difficult for you to do. So please try and make sure you get the book and study all these points on your own, and it will help you greatly. We have lots of different things you need to do, like avoiding overcrowding. Never feed your snails when food items that contain salt. So all of this will be you will get more of this breakdown on the management on the book on snail. We don't want the video to be too long so that you can also understand and it doesn't wear you out. So please get the book, and it's very important for you to have it. So this is where we'll call it a day for today's class and lesson. So if you've not subscribed, please, if this is your first video you're seeing from our channel, please do well to click on that subscribe button and subscribe. Thank you. God bless you, and bye bye.